blustery Wednesday in late March on the Pick Six podcast. Hello, everybody. Sam McKewon, along with Tom Shatel and the statesman, Elder Bland, Evan Bland.
Wow.
You are the elder. That's right. You kind of got
I'm the youngest guy here.
I know. You're the statesman, the silver tongue.
Elder Bland, I like that.
That's good. Hello, everybody. I'm Sam. We just want to thank everybody for listening. We have begun Nebraska football spring camp, and we're about a week and a half in. We've heard from Matt Rhule twice. We've heard from the coordinators. We've heard from a couple of players. We're not just talking about babies, but we're talking about other things now. We'll talk a little bit of recruiting. We're also just going to talk about how this just seems to be Matt Rhule's world, and we're all sort of living in it. My Slack's going off. That's the sound there that people might hear in the background. But I want to remind everybody that we've got a bunch of podcasts in our family of podcasts, and one of them that you're going to want to listen to this week is the Half Court Press podcast, where Joel Lorenzi talks about Creighton's end to the NCAA tournament in the Elite Eight and what is next for the Blue Jays in terms of the transfer portal. I talk a little bit over there about Nebraska basketball and its future in the transfer portal. We will talk on this podcast as well about that. Here toward the end of the podcast. Maybe we'll get to baseball. I don't know. They're not that good. I mean, they're kind of up and down.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, they're kind of up and down a little bit. Maybe we'll get to that at the end. But we're going to start with this. Matt Rhule. Yesterday we go to practice, and there's just little things that you kind of notice when you're when you're in the middle of this, and of course. We go to practice and we go to the post-practice, and there's these, sort of ropes up because he doesn't like it when people are kind of behind him on the sides and the periphery. And so there's like these sort of things that we stand behind, ask questions, and there's a pickleball net over there because they play a lot of pickleball, and he's talking about single jersey traditions and all this stuff. And it just feels like this guy has been able to come in, Tom, and just kind of it's kind of his world. Like this seems different from many coaches, maybe even including Scott Frost. Like it feels like there's he's able to do what he wants, and at the end of this week he's going to have a coach's clinic with T.O. So he's gotten the Pope's blessing.
Well, that's the honeymoon period. Every coach had one, but again, I think his is a little different because people just are at the point where they just want to win. They're not worried about style or, scheme or, Bill Callahan's going to change this or, Mike Rowley might change this or, any of those guys. I think there was more focus on, okay, but I think, this is how we do things in Nebraska. You better be careful. No, I think a lot of that now is like, just win. We're just at the point now where, okay, and I think Matt Rhule has come out of the gate strong by going to all the high schools and basically, everything he's done and said has been gold because he acts more like a Nebraska coach than anybody else ever had, and going back to Solich. So. Yeah, I think he's earned the kind of the more of a honeymoon, but it's going to come. It's going to come down to not only winning, but they need to look like they're coached next year, and whatever how many games they win. But I said this before on the podcast. I think there's a different feel to this. I don't think there's as much pressure on him right now. I think other guys had a lot of pressure coming in. Bill Callahan, boy, everybody was mad at Peterson. Oh, you better, he's an NFL guy. He better work out. This new offense. What's that going to do? But he's going to recruit. Everybody loved that. And then every coach had a certain thing they had to do right out. I don't get the feeling that people are all over Rhule going, well, you better not do this or that. They just want to win.
Competitive stamina is a phrase that was used yesterday, Evan. And I think it does a really good job of summarizing where we're at in terms of where Nebraska's at and who he is as a person. When you heard that phrase, and I know what I'm thinking of, but when you heard that phrase, what do you feel like that meant?
Competitive stamina.
Yeah.
Well, you can put it in a lot of different contexts. I think in the context of the spring, it means you're into that second week and everybody's excited for the first practice. But how excited are you when you're tired, when you've come off of the adrenaline high of the weekend with all the former Huskers and the big recruits that were in town? How self-motivated are you, I suppose? Does that look? I think, we talked about it being Matt Rhule's world. I think that's a guy who's got competitive stamina, and it reminds me of what Trev Albert said when they were looking for a candidate. He didn't want anybody who had other hobbies. He wanted a guy who was a grinder and who lived it, and that was what he did. He didn't want to do anything else. I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of this stuff, because a lot of it's small stuff, right? You talk about being seen from the side and putting ropes up at a post practice. Like that's. If you're there to do football and then you're ready to check out and do something else, you're not thinking about that stuff, right? You're not watching every single off-season workout from the last 2 years.
Right after practice, they're watching what just happened at practice.
Right. Like there's just
every single spring practice.
There's a relentless nature to it. And so, it's when I think about all the things that he's changed, I think it's a confluence of circumstances where certainly on the one hand, Nebraska's been beaten down, and I think there are examples throughout history and in sports where if a people group's beaten down enough, man, you're going to be open to whatever change comes around if someone can bring you out of that. But it's just as much Matt Rhule and the equity that he's earned going around the state, the fact that he not just institutes some of these changes, but he explains why, right?
Well,
like the jersey thing. Like he didn't just say we're doing it; he explained why they're doing it. I think that's valuable.
I like what he said yesterday about this. I thought it was kind of funny. Yeah, the first Tuesday after the first week, the players are always down, or they always go through this. Like he knew that he keeps track of the spring, the first Tuesday in spring after the first week. I think what he means by competitive stamina is. The dog days we're going into the dog days now. The first week is kind of fun and cool, and everybody's fired up. Now we're going to get into the real stuff. Okay, who wants to be here? Who wants to compete all the time? From what we've seen, the coaching staff is wired. These guys are on all the time. They're a lot like Sam. They're relentless. They rest. They never rest. They're always on. And so they're going to find out how many players are like us. Who wants to hang with us and go nonstop in this thing? And I think that's what spring football is going to be about. It's going to be about a grind and about teaching, learning, competing. I really think some of this pickleball stuff and the things they do, they're going to find out who wants to compete this spring. And that's before he talked about. Well, I told my coaches, don't worry about who has the most skill or what's, you're not worried about what everybody can do right now. They want to find out who's going to compete and work hard. I think that's what he's talking about. That we're going to get into the next 3 weeks of this isn't going to be fun unless you love it, then it's all fun. And he wants to find out who's going to have fun.
I think that's a really good point. And we talked, I want to talk to Rhule more about where he gets his sort of influences in terms of leadership culture, because you can tell that he thinks a lot about not just like the X's and O's, but the leadership component. And I, as I said before, I think there's a little bit of youth pastor there. Mm-hmm. And I got an email from a youth pastor last week saying, yeah, that sounds about right. I also think there's tech culture. And let's be clear about both of the things that I've just named here. Not everything about either one of those cultures is perfect. No one is perfect. Tech culture can be a little bit challenging because it can be like immersion culture. Part of what I think is happening is there's a kind of immersion there. Like you have this kind of, hey, we're going to be here all day long. You don't have to be here all day, but this is who we are, and this is the culture we're building. Go play some pickleball. This is who we are. This is the culture we're building. Let's push this thing in the snow. Now, did you notice that one of the former Husker football players went on Twitter and was like, I don't know what that is. I don't think you're getting a lot out of that. I don't know if you saw that
I missed that
tweet. It was from Niles Paul.
Okay.
But I think that Niles, while not wrong, I don't think the point of that exercise was to be hard. I think it was to be fun. And it was to combine the elements that, like, we're going to push a sled in some snow isn't really about whether it works some part of your whatever, your frame, but we're just going to go out and compete and do it, For people who used to watch The Office, it's Flunkerton.
Right.
Like that's part of how you build a culture, an office culture or a sports culture or whatever, is you get people involved in silly affinities, and in getting them involved in that, you all of a sudden have them down and ready to roll for when things get really hard. Now, it doesn't always work, and I don't think that's what Nick Saban does, but from what I can see of Rhule, that's part of the culture that he's attempting to build. That there's so many touch points and action points that come along with it that, again, it's almost like a football scavenger hunt. And all of a sudden you find yourself 2 weeks into it going, I'm having fun, and now I'll do what this guy tells me to do when it comes to this over here.
And you know what else? It relates to this generation really well. Like, I remember when I was growing up, my parents and grandparents would sit around and talk. Like, my generation and younger, I feel like what really energizes them is let's play games when we get together. We're not just going to necessarily just talk. We're going to do it maybe with some sort of competition greasing the wheels. And so I remember what Rhule said about why they play ping pong. And it's not just because it's competitive, although that's part of it, but it's also because that's a chance when you got to put the phone down. You got to have the paddle, and you're putting it back and forth, and you're interacting in that way. So I really think that's part of it too, is that's just a primary way this generation relates, is like, let's do it around games. Let's do it around competition. And I think we've seen that resonate.
He mentioned
with
that
these
yesterday.
guys.
This is the first time I've ever heard a coach use, in a positive context, video games. The first time ever. And he did. Did you? It was kind of slight. It was small, but it was in there. He's like, these kids are used to this. They play video games all the time. Now, I mean, my son plays video games all the time, and that isn't always a good thing. I'm trying to pull him away from it because the competitive ethos that he builds into that is not always healthy, and it's not. But that's the first time I've ever heard somebody actually try to use, we call it seeker sensitive, right? You know what I'm saying when I say the phrase seeker sensitive. I don't necessarily agree with seeker sensitive culture all the time. However, I think there's a kind of framework that he's building. We'll see if it works, but it's different. It's definitely different from Frost, and I don't know what Riley. It's different from him.
It's different from all of them. And
it's closer to Bo than it is to any of them, but in its own way.
Right, but it feels like here's the first thing we're going to do to build a program is we're going to compete all the time. We're going to find out who wants to compete, who wants to play games. Like he said, we're not going to run at the end of practice. We're going to see who's the fastest to make it a game and get them involved that way. And so I think that's, in a lot of ways, very smart. Because if you're not going to compete, you're not going to get better. You're not going to grow. You're not going to want to do all the things that are the grind that you have to do. So it's right in front of our eyes. Basically, this is how he's building the program, and it's are you going to compete? And if you're not going to compete, you're going to go left behind. I think that's good. Nebraska football at its best, whatever decade you want to choose, always competed, and because there were 1 million players, and if you weren't going to compete and beat the guy in front of you, you're never going to see the field. So then a lot of that changed. At its core, Nebraska football is competitive. We want to win. We want to beat you all the time, and they used to hammer KU and K-State, 80-0 just to do it. Osborne just because he could. He'd do it, and that was always Nebraska football.
And Sam, I mean, we have had a chance to see a couple open practices now. Do you feel like, because I kind of do, that like even just watching the drills, they're more engaging than what the handful that we saw in previous years, where the coaches are engaging, they're working on technique, but it's it kind of looks fun in its own way.
Well, there's a certain kinetic aspect to it. People are moving around more. There's more noise. The music is turned down quite a bit. It's turned up when they stretch, but it's turned down quite a bit. And again, I don't want to overly disparage what Frost did or didn't do. He had challenges that Matt Rhule doesn't have. And yeah, it didn't go well. And yeah, there was a lot of mistakes made. But he also had to deal with stuff that, Matt Rhule doesn't have to deal with. There's people who don't care who Matt Rhule is and what he can do for them, the way that I think Scott had to deal with that almost immediately. Hey, you know me from this and this and this. Right. What are you going to do for me? Well, Matt Rhule doesn't have any of that. He's the opposite. He's trying to build relationships with people and say, what can I do for you? And I think that's just sort of a different relationship. So yeah, I think there's a kinetic energy there. We haven't had a podcast since the last time we talked to the coordinators, and I thought the conversation with Satterfield last week was really, really interesting. So he talked about having a positionless offense as if he's running Fred Hoiberg's basketball offense, being able to move guys all over the place, talking about tight ends, having multiple tight ends on the field, potentially even 13 personnel, where you have one tight end of sort of each size and trait, like the old Nintendo hockey game. So it's this weird sort of amorphous, it kind of looks like the 49ers, whatever. And so I was looking at the coaches clinic this week, and here's what he's teaching at the coaches clinic, because it's on the web. It's on the web. Explosive play action pass game. So, in other words, run it, pull it, throw it. I got to tell you, just the framework and the philosophy of it, I kind of like it.
Well, I wasn't here for that. I was out of town.
Covering a good basketball team. Yeah, you're forgiven.
Louisville, Kentucky. But I've said this before, and I think, there's a lot to do this spring. There's a lot to do on offense. Offensive line is where it starts. But I think the running game is so important for this program right now in this conference. And they need to have that identity that they haven't had since Abdullah, where, you need 3 yards. We got a guy, we got a line, and we got a guy that's going to get it. And the chains keep moving, and they keep moving, and the clock keeps ticking. And that's how you win games in this conference. Who can force that on the other team, and who can stop it? But I really think Nebraska's had sort of a committee revolving door of running backs, and I feel like it's time to find a back that is not necessarily special, but certainly a guy who's going to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it'll be interesting how they do that. Like the philosophy of run, play action to throw sounds good, but how do you? I mean, you got to have, as you've said many times, Tom, you got to have the line to be able to run, right? Or you're setting up third and long anyway.
I think they're going to have a pretty good line. I've said that many times now.
I like the fact that and I don't know how good any of them are, but they got an experienced center. I think
they do.
The offensive line, everything. Center is the most important thing, and he's been there and done it last few years. Cam Jerkins was going to be a great one, probably in the NFL, but he wasn't a great one here. He was learning how to do it, and that's hard to do, especially if you're a tight end.
Mm-hmm.
But it turned to be good for him. I just feel like Nebraska's become so much about quarterbacks and wide receivers. Everything has revolved around that for years. I think it needs to come back to line and running back, and start with that. And but everybody loves those receivers. And last year, the chemistry between Thompson and Palmer, saved the day too many times to tell. But I really feel that it's a great identity for Nebraska to have running back, and I don't know recruiting. I don't know how many good high school running backs there are these days, because a lot of the offenses don't necessarily lean that way in high school. But running back and offensive line, I think, is really important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not a coach, and I'm not a player, and I'm not like exactly a recruiting analyst, although I pay a lot of attention to that. What I would say is there are a lot of really good open field runners today. What a lot of these kids don't learn as easily is they're not running in a too tight end, run the ball downhill offense, and so when they get to college and all of a sudden they get to the line of scrimmage and they run into somebody, they don't know what to do. They bounce it. They try to run around everybody. The really good backs at this level, and this is why you need 3 or 4 guys, is you see a crease for 4, you go get 5. You see a crease for 6, you go get 10. And then by the fourth quarter, that 6 is 12, and that's where your open field stuff comes in, because all of a sudden you've worn the team down, and boom, you hit a big one. That's what they want to do. I think and now, did you find Matt Rhule's comment yesterday about having a really good running back room interesting? Now, do you think that comment was made to encourage those guys, or because it's a reflection of what he really thinks about the room?
I mean, I didn't think it was that shocking because they didn't look to anybody in the portal. I mean, all the areas that they addressed all over the team, they didn't really even sniff running backs. And so you felt like right off the bat that they knew they had something. I mean, Gabe Ervin, I think we've heard his name at every availability, and how much the staff likes him. A.J. Allen's a guy who clearly has oozed potential before he got hurt last year. We heard from Ramir Johnson, who looks like he could be a redemption story. The staff's still kind of scratching their heads maybe about where he went last year, and he was healthy. So, I mean, I think they're seeing kind of what we saw. There's depth there. There's range of skill. I mean, Ramir's sort of that straight line burner. Anthony Grant was impressive between the tackles at times when he would go.
Oh, yeah.
He would go north and south.
He's a great open field runner, too. He's really good after the first level.
So I feel like there's a range of talent there. They knew that. There's a depth. You talk about needing to have 3 or 4 guys. I think they do, and they think they do. And so that's a pretty strong statement. That's one of the stronger statements I think Matt Rhule has made about the depth or the strength of his team when he can say, I don't know about the rest of the Big Ten, but we have a pretty good running back room. To me, that resonated more than a lot of what he said.
You notice that they haven't said anything of that regard about the receivers. Not yet.
No.
And yet I would argue that the receivers could be pretty darn talented. They moved Janiron Bonner from receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't want to see what, I mean.
But they're looking at Julio Martin at receiver too, so I mean, you can kind of play.
And they're going to get some guys this summer. I think what they're trying to do, so one of the things that I think we're seeing is that they have too many defensive backs. Literally. Mm-hmm. They can't keep them all.
Yeah.
So you either move some of those guys to different positions because they're good athletes, or you have to let some people know what the writing is on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're in the process of that. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball, in fact. Anything jump out at you about what Tony White said? I'm not hearing a lot yet, but I didn't expect to.
Not that what he said. Honestly, the A.J. Rollins development was interesting to me. I mean, we already knew that defensive line was thin. And
what's that tell you about that position?
That it's thin and that they need some bodies.
Well, not just bodies.
But I mean, he's a quality high school player.
Yeah.
And they slipped in the line that he already maybe leads that side in sacks in terms of what they've done. I mean, I guess you can take that to mean he's been really good, or the rest of the line has, been a little bit underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, Evan, I'll be really honest with you. They were good at times last year, but the pass rush was the most disappointing thing about last year's team. We all thought it was going to be hell on wheels, and it was not even heck. It wasn't even, it wasn't even heck on a bike.
Huh.
So it's, to me, I just don't know if they have. I mean, you're watching Terrence Knight in there, and he's working with Hutmaker and
Buckley
and Wynn. Ty Robinson's hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what you got, and that's not a lot. And then Judy, who's kind of been working with it, but I think he might have been banged up yesterday. I don't know. He wasn't working. I didn't see him out there working with Knighton. But that's not I mean, they're going to have to reimagine that group and reimagine the edge rusher. And they might have 2 inside linebackers, but I don't know if they got 4. I'm just trying to warn people that, this is going to take time on that side of the ball.
I agree. And I like the recruits that they brought in. We've talked about this before. I think in a year or two, a lot of those guys can be really good players. But how do you address that in the short term? What does that look like? And the past, 2-3 years, Nebraska's addressed defensive shortcomings through the portal and brought guys in late in the summer or even early in fall camp. So it's not to rule out that they can't bring in further reinforcements, especially on the line. I would think that's probably something that they'd be looking for next month when the portal opens up. But yeah, I agree. There's not a lot of depth there. You remember Ty Robinson's comment last spring about how they had taken way too many reps, and he felt like he was like a 38-year-old man or something like that. I'm sure his teammates are going to be feeling something similar here in the next couple weeks.
I don't think there's any question. Hardest position on the field to recruit.
Can you can I look at the roster close enough to know the answer to this? But if the pass rush isn't maybe if it's not ready yet, can you build this defense around hybrids, linebackers, safeties, D-backs who fly around and obviously I can cover, but I can also run stop. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's probably what you start to do. Again, I'm not a coach or a player. What I would say is that that strategy looks pretty good in the Big 12 with TCU doing it, I think. But the teams that TCU struggled with last year. Yep. They lost to K-State because K-State just went. And at the end of the Michigan game, after the 2 pick sixes, Michigan's running through them like, crap through a goose.
Yep.
So if you put that in the Big Ten and you're running smaller guys all over the place, I think by 6 weeks in, you're going to really take it on the chin. So I think they have to have some big guys too.
Sure.
But yes, I think that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to try to use 240-pound guys and move them all over the place. And to be clear, Tom, that's kind of what, in some ways, although Wisconsin has some, as they used to call them, war daddies on the defensive line there, they do. They have one of them that's going to go in the second round. That's kind of what Wisconsin did. They were running a 2-4-5. They're running guys all over the place. But if you hit Wisconsin long enough, you would notice they would break because they didn't have a ton of big guys on the field. So
there are some. There is talent on that roster to play D-line, and there are guys. But I just wonder, will you we have to supplement the pass rush with other guys? I don't know.
I think you do, and this is again just my opinion, and Tony White would probably tell me I'm full of crap. I think the defense that they run, it's harder to manufacture a pass rush because you're bringing at least one player and usually two from depth. And anytime a lineman can see where the guy's coming from, it's a little easier than a guy that's like a half inch away from you before the snap, and all of a sudden, Chase Young's got his hand into your pad and he's around you. Boom. Mm-hmm. And so I think those are challenges that they're going to have to work through. As you could see, I could talk about the defense for a long time because I feel like that's been the issue. Like the thread that you have to wind through Nebraska's time in the Big Ten is that the defense never made a full transition when Bo was there. I actually think they were making progress when Riley was there with Banker, but then Banker and Eichhorst didn't get along, and Banker, MF'd some people in the athletic department, so he got fired. And then they brought in Diaco, and Diaco's thing would have taken 3 years to get right. It was a mousetrap defense. And then, Chinander took, you saw it with Chinander, it took him 4 years to get to the point where they had a defense. And then what did Matt Rhule say yesterday? And I love that he said it because he's not kidding around. He goes, if I have to play 11 guys, I'm going to lose my mind. Mm-hmm. And and I hear what he's saying, but what I want to say in response is I'm like, Coach, they only had 11 guys. That they didn't have 18 guys that could put out on the field because it's that hard to recruit those players here. And Chinander's scheme was a little intricate.
That was a 400-level class type of defense.
No question, but it's hard. It's not easy to get those guys here. And, Iowa has a much simpler defense. And Iowa's got 3, ass kickers in the top 100 of the NFL draft at each level because they get better players. And so, I don't know, We could talk about that a long time. I really like White. I think he's really interesting. We're going to talk to Knighton and Evan Cooper tomorrow, and I think they're both really interesting too. So I just want to, like, I'm doing a column on Purdue this week, which is on Ryan Walters, who is at Illinois. That guy put in a defense in 2 years. Well, the reason he was able to do it is he had Lovie Smith's recruits. And Lovie, who knows Florida, went down to Florida and recruited over the course of 3 years about 25 guys. And he recruited really good players because Lovie Smith's a good talent evaluator. And so when Ryan Walters got there, he had all the pieces in place. Now he's got to go to Purdue and he's got to do it himself. He's got to make the menu. Good luck. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that so easy because Lovie Smith, although he had flaws, like as in quarterbacks, he wasn't flawed in picking out players. And Ryan Walters got to benefit from that, and now he has to build it. Same thing at Nebraska. They got to build that, and it's not easy. All right, I'll shut up now.
No, you're good. There's probably a question there about just the depth of the defense. I think that's part of what it's been for Nebraska too. Is to your point about having 11 or 12 guys out there, they didn't play 18, 19, or 20 because they didn't have 18 or 19 or 20 that they trusted or were ready to go. So I think that's still the case on the defensive line, as we've said. You get past Reimer and Henrich at the linebacker spot. You don't really know what you have with Sherman and Borders, and then there's probably a drop-off after that. And defensive back, you could roll out all 4 of your starters from last year, but who knows how that's going to go. So, yeah, I think you have to have depth. And we learned, I think even just from last year, just the importance of keeping it simple, right? Like as much improvement as the defense showed late last year with the same guys, essentially, I think it was you learn the value of clean, clear teaching and how that translates onto the field too. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yes. The most effective way of communicating is to be persistent, clear, that's just good management. And, clear expectations, persistent message, simplify. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Tom, any other thoughts about Rhule over the first 2 weeks of camp? You were there for both of his chats.
Mm-hmm. No, I pretty much exhausted it. We'll have more on Saturday. We'll see him again.
Yeah, he's going to talk after the coaching clinic. They were able to secure TO for that. For people that might be interested, I'm not going to write about this because you know what? I've written enough over the last however many weeks about many things. But I'll tell you the topics that they're going to teach on at the as soon as I get my password in here correct. Let's see here. Here are the topics they're going to teach on at the clinic. The X's and O's clinic. Evan Cooper, low red zone man defense. Donovan Raiola, inside zone run game. Satterfield, I already said. Dvorak, 4-down quarters versus 11 personnel RPO game. So quarters defense against 11 personnel run pass option. Kind of what Nebraska's going to do. Some Tony White's defending empty. That is, zero. That's basically zero personnel. Mm-hmm. Although usually empty now includes a running back. Terrence Knighton, Bear defense plus adjustments. Bear defense, for people who don't know, is the 46 defense with defensive linemen lined up and the 3 interior linemen. Bob Wager, is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. Bob Wager's going to do a good one. My high school off-season plan, which I think is good because he just came from high school.
Yeah.
Ed Foley's going to do blocking kicks. I like it.
Yep.
And then T.O. will talk. Matt Rhule will introduce T.O. He'll talk. So Rhule will talk for like 20 minutes, and then T.O. is going to give a keynote speak for an hour. And he could do it still, but that would be an interesting. I don't think we're going to be allowed into that, unfortunately. So won't be able to glean that wisdom from Osborne because he usually has some pretty interesting things to say about football, and he pays a lot of attention on that roundtable that they had with he and Trev Alberts and Rhule. Did you notice he made the comment about Urban Meyer and he's still frustrated that he didn't figure out the read option before Urban Meyer did?
I love that.
That's great.
He's like, well, we didn't figure that out, and Urban Meyer kind of did.
Can you imagine Tommy Frazier doing that?
Oh, my goodness.
Right.
Oh, I mean, Yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, it was Rich Rodriguez too, but like that that changed college football.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I got to interview Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow on the phone one August.
oh, that's great.
And while it must have been 07 or 08 when I think he was going to his senior year, about the Nebraska influence, the SID. I told them what I wanted to do, and they said, "Yeah, they'll both do it." And so I'll call you at this time. He called me, handed the phone to Urban Meyer. I asked him about Osborne and the option, and he went away. Just talked about how much he learned growing up about the option, how much influence Nebraska had on him. He handed the phone to the quarterback, and yeah, Tommy Frazier was my guy. I wanted to be like him. Blah 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 blah. So anything Osborne, like I wish I'd done that. Everything, the inspiration for everything Meyer did came from Osborne. So there aren't many new things in football. I guess that was one of them, but it was born from old ideas too. So
no question about it. Yeah, Osborne. A play that they used to win the 08 national title game against Oklahoma was that little tight end shovel. Nebraska debuted that in the 92 Oklahoma game. They used it in that game that many years before. And now all kinds of teams use it. The Chiefs use it. Other teams use it.
Yeah.
Osborne used that for the first time. It was a tight end shovel. And I think Osborne might have done it with Richard Bell, like the wingback, but nevertheless, it was the same play. And it was pretty darn cool. Let's move on quickly to Nebraska basketball. Somebody, you can ask me. So Nebraska basketball, they're the transfer portal, and they need a center. They might need two centers, two posts, a point guard, and they absolutely need. There's no question they need a point guard and a center, and then I think they need maybe another post, and I think they need a shooter. And the guy that came in yesterday, and Nebraska's got a chance, is Kerr Kriisa, and he is from Arizona. He's a dynamic point guard who was there, led the Pac-12 in assists, led the Pac-12 in questionable 32-foot three-pointers. Very dynamic player. I think you have to let him play with his emotions. There's no other way to put that. Very emotional, very volatile player. Picks up technicals, spars with opponents, talks a lot of trash, gets upset. Might be the best point guard in the portal, though. What do you do?
And it's down to 3 schools, right? With him,
It's down to 3: West Virginia, Nebraska, and Xavier. I just think so. And Tom, you and I haven't had this conversation on the podcast. Whatever year 5 was going to be, I think we agreed, well, Fred's coming back based on what happened this year. But I don't think you can go 16-16 next year.
No, you got to be in one of the tournaments, and I think it's there'll be a change. There are some programs that are established, and I think Fred is getting there. I think this last year was a big year to establish what he wanted to do, but he doesn't have a lot of time to. I mean, when they choose in the portal, they have to choose wisely. They have to get guys who are going to fit not only what they need, but also the way they want to play. I still feel like they're a little bit like they kind of just have to get some guys in there because it hasn't been built up yet. So. And I hate to use Creighton as an example, but Creighton can, everything's here established. We're just picking 1 or 2 guys who are going to fit with this group. Nebraska, I think, like, come on, we need you. We need whoever we can get. So it's a little bit of a gamble still, but I think the last 2, the last year really established who they want to be. So maybe that helps them. I get those guys. A lot of noise out there about Chucky Hepburn. We'll see.
He is not in the portal.
No, he's on the portal, but they lost last night to North Texas. It was a bad loss for Wisconsin, a bad year in a lot of ways. They got to the NIT semifinal, but not what they want to be. We'll see. But there's always this is. I've been told this is going to be a wild year in the portal. So the next few weeks will be crazy. So, but Nebraska needs, like you said, and they could use Trout. We'll see. What I've said is, go get that. Take the NIL hose or the tube and plug it into basketball, and start funneling all those dollar bills take some of them from football and funnel them into the basketball office, and let them, have them, they need to be on a equal footing with a lot of people they're trying to get players from, and right now they just don't. They need to get NIL juice, and you might be surprised who they can get with that. I mean, it's an attractive place. It's a good coach. He can help you get to the NBA, and as we've seen with Nebraska football, people don't mind Lincoln, Nebraska. They'll come play for Lincoln, Nebraska, but they got to get the NIL. So the money's there. Funnel it into basketball.
What I think is fascinating about that is, like, does kind of the desperation help you if you're Nebraska, or does that hurt you? Like, you're going to be more motivated to add those players and try to be more creative in how you pitch them and present. But if you're the recruit, like, what's more appealing? Is it like to go to this place that absolutely has to have you at all costs, or is it to go to this other place and be sort of that last cog and fit into there? It's kind of like these recruiting discussions that we have, with a guy like Dylan Raiola in high school. Is like, do you want to be the man, or do you want to be kind of part of something else? And I think just that desperation tone, because you're right, like, Nebraska has to have these guys. The coaches know they have to.
I think
have
everybody's different. And last year, Baylor Sharman wanted to be that last cog and go to a Final Four, and he wanted to be on that kind of team. Did he get his NIL? You bet he did. But I really think there are other guys who just want to play. They want playing time and maybe a new voice in their ear with the coach they don't know, and they want the NIL. So everybody's different. But NIL has replaced recruiting in a lot of ways. I remember the April recruiting class was always big in college basketball. Now, who cares? Yeah, we care about recruits, but for Nebraska, we're not building. We're trying to win next year. So, and they were trying to win last year. They had to win last year, or they weren't going to be around. So, we're back to that now. So, point guard, center, I agree. Scores.
I mean, the Hepburn thing would be interesting. We don't want to.
Well, and we don't know.
We just don't know.
We don't know if he'd come, but he was really involved when he came out of high school.
I feel like if he went to the portal, it would not be to just go anywhere.
Yeah. So
that's just my.
Let's keep an eye on
cents.
that. And
but I don't know if he will. And the other thing is too, if he did go to the portal, would he want to be in a league that already knew him inside and out, which this league does? But I don't know. Like, that would be really interesting. My sense is they're pursuing Kerr Kriisa in part because they're going to go after however many point guards they have to get one. And, they'll do what they have to do.
Yep. It's like quarterbacks. You can't have too many.
That's right. And we'll see. Casey still hasn't put his name in, but he will eventually, I think, and just test the waters one way or the other. And just see what the NBA has to say, and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, I think that's pretty much all we have for this week. For Tom and for the elder statesman, Evan Bland, I'm Sam McKewon with the Pick Six Podcast. Thanks for listening.